Going on the record at 9:38 a.m. Today's date is May the 17th, 2019. This begins the video deposition of Stephanie Hofeller, taken in the matter of Common Cause et al. Versus David Lewis in his official capacity as Senior Chairman of the House Select Committee on Redistricting et al. This is filed in the General Court of Justice, Superior Court Division in Wake County, North Carolina. Case number 18-CVS-014001. Counsel will please identify yourselves for the record and whom you represent, and then our court reporter will swear in our witness.
Stanton Jones from Arnold Porter for the plaintiffs.
Eddie Speaks with Porter School for the plaintiffs.
Paul Cox with the North Carolina Attorney General's Office for the State Board of Elections.
John Branch with Shannon Walbert for the intervener defendants.
Tom Farragel for Deacons for the legislative defendants.
Elizabeth Scully with Baker Hostetler for the legislative defendants.
Tom Sparks representing the deponent, Stephanie Hofeller.
Would you raise your right hand? Do you affirm the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? This you do subject to the penalties of perjury.
I affirm.
Good morning, Ms. Hofeller.
Hello.
I'm Stanton Jones from Arnold Porter, and I represent the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Stephanie Louise Hofeller.
Excellent. And am I right that you previously went by what I believe is a married name of Stephanie Hofeller Lizon?
It was actually Stephanie Louise Lizon.
Got it. And now you've dropped the Lizon, you just go by Stephanie Hofeller.
That's right.
Okay, and that's your maiden name?
Correct.
Excellent. Okay, I'll go over some brief ground rules for the deposition today, if that's okay?
Yes.
So you understand that you've taken an oath to tell the truth today?
I do.
Great. And the court reporter is taking down everything that we say, so let's try not to talk over one another. If you let me finish my question, I will let you finish your answer. Does that make sense?
Acknowledged, yes.
Your counsel may object to some of my questions today, and that's fine. You understand that unless he instructs you not to answer a question, you should let him state his objection for the record, and then you'll go ahead and answer.
Yes, I understand that.
Great. Is there any reason that you couldn't give complete, accurate, and truthful testimony today?
No.
Great. And if you want a break, just let me know. We'll finish the question and answer that we're doing, and happy to take a break whenever you'd like. Okay?
All right, thanks.
Great. What state do you live in?
Kentucky.
Great. So you don't live in North Carolina?
That's correct.
Okay. And where you live in Kentucky, how far is it from where we are in Raleigh?
It's about a 10 or 11 hour drive.
Okay. Do you know roughly how many miles is it?
Roughly 650, something like that, okay. I think.
And can you tell me who were your parents?
My father is Thomas Brooks Hofeller, and my mother is Kathleen Hertz of Hofeller.
Great. So I have some questions about the subpoena that you received in this case. Is that okay?
Yes.
Great. So earlier this year, you received a subpoena from the plaintiffs in this case. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1. Do you recognize this document as the subpoena that you received from the plaintiffs in this case?
Yes, yes I do.
Okay. And do you see on the first page, under name and address of person subpoenaed, on the left side toward the top, it says Stephanie Hofeller Lizon. That's you, correct?
That is me.
Okay, great. And it says care of Tom Sparks, Esquire. That's your attorney, correct?
That's my attorney.
Great. Okay. And if you look down in the handwritten portion where there's a date and a signature, do you see it's dated February 13th, 2019?
I do.
Okay. And is that around the time that you recall receiving this subpoena?
Yes.
When you received the subpoena, did you take a look at it?
Yeah.
Great.
I got it in a electronic format initially from my attorney, because I wasn't actually in the state at that moment, but I was shortly after that.
Great. And if you flip a couple of pages ahead to what's marked as page 2 at the bottom of the page. Do you see where it says list of documents and things to be produced pursuant to this subpoena?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And when you received this subpoena in February, did you review this list of documents and things that were asked to be produced?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you understand that the subpoena was requesting any electronic storage devices that had any of your father's work drawing maps for the North Carolina legislature?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any materials that were responsive to these requests in the subpoena?
I did.
Okay. And am I right that those were electronic storage devices?
Yes.
Okay.
External hard drives and I don't know what the proper, or what people prefer to call them, ad stick, thumb drive, external storage devices to be used as backup principally.
Okay. So the materials that you had that were responsive to the requests in the subpoena were external hard drives and external what we'll call thumb drives.
That's correct.
Okay, great.
And nothing that appeared to have been pulled out from an already assembled computer. These were all, backup devices.
Okay. These were all external devices that you would need to plug into a computer some way to
Correct.
look at them. Okay. Am I right that these storage devices had previously belonged to your father?
Yes.
Okay.
And mother.
And you understood that the storage devices contained your father's work on North Carolina legislative maps?
Objection of form, leading. You can answer.
It was, at what point, I would have to ask you to clarify at what point it was or wasn't clear. I knew when I first saw them, I knew that they were all belonging to my father and mother. I wasn't really sure which of them, if any, would have anything involving his work in North Carolina or elsewhere.
Got it. Let's focus on the time when you received the subpoena and you...
at that point, yes, I did know that it contained, that all of those devices had at least one or two files that were labeled in a way that it was obvious that they pertained to my father's work redistricting in North Carolina.
And did you send the storage devices, those storage devices that we've been discussing, to the plaintiffs' lawyers in response to the subpoena?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Do you recall roughly when you sent them?
I remember it was about a month after I received the subpoena. Originally, my intention was to bring them physically to Raleigh. But I got delayed, and it was then decided that it would be best for preserving the integrity of the evidence that it would be going straight to a third party.
Great. And I'll represent to you that I received the materials you sent on March 13th. Does that sound about right in terms of the time?
That does. Actually, where I was in Kentucky, I couldn't even find a FedEx office. I had to go down the highway. I was surprised.
Can we mark this? I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 2. You can take a moment to flip through. That's fine. Go ahead.
That's
So my first question is, if you look at the very first page, do you recognize the photographs there as images of the package that you sent containing the storage devices in
Yes.
response to the subpoena?
yes, that does appear to be the box that I sent them in exactly.
Great. And on the first page, if you look at the top picture, it's addressed to R. Stanton Jones at Arnold and Porter LLP at an address in Washington, D.C. Is that the address where you sent the package?
Yes.
Great. And if you flip to the second page, do you recognize those as additional photographs of the outside of the package that you sent with the storage devices in response to the subpoena?
Yes.
If you flip to the third page, if you focus on the bottom image, do you recognize that as a photograph of the interior of the box that you sent to the plaintiffs' lawyers with the storage devices in response to the subpoena?
Yes.
Okay. If you flip to page 4, do you recognize the image there as being one of the thumb drives that you put in the package and sent to the plaintiffs' lawyers in response to the subpoena?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember offhand how many external hard drives there were and how many thumb drives there were?
I know there were 4 external hard drives. I honestly don't remember exactly how many. There were there were a couple of empty thumb drives in my possession, so I was making sure that I wasn't sending anything wrong. These were all the ones that I got from my father, but I don't remember exactly, from his room, but I don't remember exactly how many there were, like 8 or 9 maybe, was it, or 7?
So if I'll represent to you that inside the package that we received, that we're looking at photographs of, there were 4 external hard drives, as you said, and also 18 thumb drives.
18, yeah.
Does that
Okay.
seem right?
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
I'm going to interrupt, and I'm new to the game, but what were the stipulations about objections in this case? Are all objections reserved except for privilege and form of the question?
Yep. It's the way we've been operating. So
Okay, thank you.
I'm not going to go through every single photograph here. There's about 50 pages of photographs, but would you just take a moment and flip through them, and if you could just tell me, do you recognize these as photographs of the storage devices, both the external hard drives and the thumb drives that you sent to the plaintiffs' lawyers in response to the subpoena? Do you recognize them that way?
So far, yes. It's a rainbow of colors. I remember that too. Yes, those look, all of them, I remember.
Great. So having flipped through all of the photographs here, you recognize all of these images as being...
I don't see anything that I didn't have my hands on and put in that package.
Okay, excellent. Would you flip to page 23? Do you see the image there of a storage device with the label NC Data?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall that as one of the images that you sent?
I do.
Or, sorry, as one of the
One
storage
of the
devices?
storage devices, yes.
Okay. Before sending all of these storage devices to the plaintiffs' lawyers in response to the subpoena you received, did you alter any of the contents of the storage devices?
No.
Okay. No. Did you delete any files that were on any of the storage devices?
No. I was careful not to add or take anything away.
Okay. Did you modify any of the files in any way?
No.
Okay. You didn't make any changes at all to any of the files on the storage devices?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'll just start over again so we have a clean record. So you did not make any changes to any of the files or data on these storage devices before sending them to the plaintiffs' lawyers in response to the subpoena?
That's correct. I did not.
Okay. Okay. You can put that to the side. So now I have some pretty basic questions about where you got the devices from. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first, can you please tell me just the month and the year when you got these devices?
October 2018.
Okay. And next, could you please tell me just where specifically did you get the devices from, just the physical location for starters?
The apartment where my recently deceased father lived with my mother at Springmore.
Okay. And what is Springmore?
Springmore is a retirement community.
Okay. And your father and mother had been living in this apartment in Springmore before his death, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And at the time you got these files from the Springmore apartment in October 2018, was your mother living there at the time?
Yes, she was.
Okay. Before getting the devices from the apartment in Springmore, did you ask your mother if it was okay to take them?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you ask her that in October 2018?
Yes, that same day.
Okay. Did your mother object to you taking the devices?
No, she didn't.
Okay. Did she say it was okay to take the devices?
Yes, she encouraged me to.
Okay. Okay. So now I'm going to go back in and ask a few more questions just to fill in some additional details about when and where you got the devices, okay?
Yes.
Okay. When did you first learn that your father had died?
September 30th, 2018.
Okay. And when you learned of his death, and I'll say for the record, I'm sorry for the loss. When you learned of your father's death, did you contact your mother?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go to visit her then?
Yes.
Okay. And did you go to visit her in Raleigh at the Springmore apartment in October 2018?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And at that time, when you were there at the Springmore apartment in Raleigh in October 2018, visiting your mother, did you go? Did you and your mother go through some of your father's things?
There wasn't much to go through. Most of what there even was in there was what was left out, really. There were a couple of desk drawers. There were a couple of keepsakes of mine that I was looking for. But one of the main reasons that I was looking was because when I walked in the door to his room, immediately I saw a keepsake of mine from my childhood, a jewelry box that I had, and that I had left in my parents' care. And inside of it, it was displayed prominently right under the flag that he was buried with, and, well, not with, but the flag that draped his coffin, and a picture of my grandparents. And inside the box was everything exactly as I had left it. So I took that to mean that I was supposed to look for other things. And so I started, I thought there was a chance that there might have been something specifically for me, as in a note or a message of some sort that I would find.
Okay. And was that when you found the storage devices that we've been discussing?
It was in that same incident, yes, that same evening.
Okay. And where in the apartment were the storage devices?
They were on a shelf in my father's room.
Okay. Were they just sitting out open on the shelf?
Yes, they were. There was a bag, a clear plastic bag with the thumb drives and ad sticks, and then there was just a stack of, it wasn't the only thing on the shelf. He had also some of those pull-out boxes that kind of are like drawers that had some of his papers in there. And the hard drives just were there in the corner of, it was one of those kind of box-style bookshelves. It wasn't just a straight shelf. Some of them had those removable drawers in them, and others were just open.
Okay. But all of the 4 external hard drives and the 18 thumb drives that you sent to the plaintiffs' lawyers in response to the subpoena were on this bookshelf in your father's room in the apartment at Springmore?
That's right.
Okay. And they weren't in any sort of safe or lockbox. They were just out?
That's right.
Okay. Had you seen any of these storage devices before?
In as much as I could say later, having looked at them, and when they were done, then I was able to confirm that, yes, there were a couple of those that I recognized from when I was either staying with on short trips or living with my parents in their house in Alexandria, Virginia.
Got it. And could you just tell me briefly, how did you recognize what was the connection that you made to these storage devices?
One of them had that blue rubber lining around it. That I recognized immediately. And I know that there could be more than one, and I also know it's a removable cover, so. But then it appeared to be really what I was looking for, really.
Okay. And after getting the storage devices, when did you ask your mother if it was okay to take them?
When I noticed them, it was in a survey, and I had first come in, and I was a little overwhelmed with emotion when I first walked into my father's room. Excuse me. So, I was sort of looking around. There was heirloom furniture all around the apartment, and other things that belonged to my extended family, my, great-grandparents and such. So I sort of took the whole thing in, had another sort of, casual, brief conversation with my mother about how things had unfolded. And it was later when I was back in there, and I also said, I think he wanted me to have this jewelry box. And so I said, I'm going to take that. Is that okay? And she said, of course. And I said, I'm going to take these too. I think that I'll find the pictures and some of the things that I'm looking for on these. Can I take these? And she said, absolutely. She said, I don't even know how to use them.
Okay. Do you know if anyone else other than you had been to your parents' apartment at Springmore to look through or potentially take any of your father's things before you had gotten there?
That was my understanding, because before I took any of those things, I specifically asked my mother. I said, he had a work laptop still. Yes? She said, yes. And she said, and a work computer. And I said, okay, did Dale come and take that stuff? She said, yes. Dale took the laptop, Dale took the work computer, and Dale took everything that he wanted.
And who is Dale?
Dalton Lamar Oldham. That was my father's business partner, attorney. Together, he and my father were geographic strategies.
Okay. And you understood your mother to be telling you that Mr. Oldham had come to the apartment in Springmore after your father's death and taken, was it a laptop and a desktop computer?
Yes, and again, it wasn't clear exactly how much he had taken as my father was dying, that my father had said to him, take this. I don't think my mother really remembers exactly what was there shortly before and then shortly after his death.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now I have some questions just about what you did after getting the devices, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So after getting the devices from your parents' apartment in Springmore, did you consistently hold on to them until you sent them to the plaintiffs' lawyers in response to the subpoena?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't give them to anyone else for any period of time in there?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry I laugh. It's just I was so thrilled to have some of this precious data of mine that I would not let anyone else near them.
Great. And did you stay in Raleigh then, or did you eventually go back to Kentucky?
I stayed in Raleigh for a few days that time, and then I went back to Kentucky.
Okay. And did you take the storage devices with you when you went back to Kentucky?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And were you then able to look at any of the actual contents of the devices?
I looked at the content of some of them that first night in my hotel room in Raleigh.
Oh, okay. Did you connected them to a computer to be able to look at them?
Yes, I had a laptop with me that I used. I had found an appropriate cable in one of my father's drawers. I found a whole box of cables, and one of them was the proper adapter for those external hard drives.
Okay. And when you did connect some of the storage devices to the computer to be able to look at the contents, did you see any personal information in there, like photographs or other personal information? Yes,
I found specifically really what I was looking for, which were files of mine that I had. Essentially, I backed them up onto my parents' computer when I was visiting them last, and actually many times before that, as I felt that it was a really good way to assure that they would be preserved, because I knew that my father was not, I knew he had a tendency to be, careful about those things, those kinds of things. And yes, I found a great many photographs that I was looking for of my children, and other documents that were related to my life, matters that concerned me and my children, and I felt, well, I buried this treasure, and that I was getting to dig it up. And I was really very excited to see those pictures again. Also some pictures of my great-grandparents and things like that I had hoped that I would find copies of as well.
Got it. So some of these photographs and other personal materials were things that you yourself had stored on your parents' computer years earlier when your father was still alive. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you saw some of those materials on these storage devices?
Yes.
Okay. Other than personal files like photographs, letters, etc., did you see data or files on the storage devices that related to your father's work creating maps?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And I think I asked this before, but I'll just ask it again. Before sending the storage devices to the plaintiff's lawyers in this case in response to the subpoena, did you change or manipulate any of the files on the storage devices that related to your father's work?
No, I did not.
Okay. Am I right that at some point after getting the storage devices, you contacted someone at the organization Common Cause? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember the specific person who you first contacted at Common Cause?
I first reached out to Bob Phillips, the director, and it was in hopes that he and Common Cause might be able to give me a referral to find an attorney for my mother.
Okay. And in the course of those discussions with Mr. Phillips, did you discuss these storage devices?
Not in that conversation, no.
Okay. Did Mr. Phillips connect you to someone else at Common Cause?
Yes.
Okay. And who was that?
Jane Pinsky.
Okay. Did you then have discussions with Ms. Pinsky?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And in the course of those discussions with Ms. Pinsky, did you mention the storage devices that we've been discussing?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you offer to provide the devices to Ms. Pinsky and Common Cause?
You know, when I first brought it up, it was really just a kind of an anecdotal reference to a interview with David Daley that I had recently read. At the end of this interview, his last statement, and it was really the gist of it was about the fact that the rejected districts had been sent for redraw back to my father. And now he was deceased, and the comment that David Daley made was, I think that somewhere out there on a hard drive, there's a gift for the state legislators.
I see. And am I right, Mr. Daley is a journalist and author who covers redistricting issues?
Yes, he sort of brought it to a little bit more mainstream attention by, I don't know, making it a little more personable, maybe even.
Got it. And the article that you had read by Mr. Daley was one that was discussing the redraw of North Carolina's legislative
Specifically,
districts.
yes. That was the first time. I did not even know that. I was aware of Mr. Daley's book about Operation Red Map, but I was not aware that he was actually from North Carolina and would have such a specific interest in this for that reason.
Got it. So, so in these discussions with Ms. Pinsky, having read Mr. Daley's article, am I right that you expressed to Ms. Pinsky that you wanted to provide the storage devices to her and to Common Cause?
Well, I simply.
I just wanted to let him finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I simply quipped that I have some hard drives, and we continued a discussion about that. At that time, I was not aware that there was that one of the matters was not an appeal. I was under the impression that all of the matters pending were appeals, therefore no new evidence. When I first mentioned these things, it was really from a journalistic point of view and more anecdotal. I did not presume that they had any value as evidence,
I see. And
per se.
Did Ms. Pinsky explain to you that there is, in fact, a lawsuit relating to North Carolina's legislative districts that is not on appeal yet, that is still in the trial phase?
She did explain, I think the way she put it, because we were discussing whether there was new evidence or no new evidence, errors of law only. So she mentioned that the case of the state legislative districts would be accepting new evidence. And I said, well, I think this might be pertinent. And I didn't know if it was, I said, even at that time, I said that I was skeptical that there was anything here that was not already disclosed. After all of those, I recall personally discovery and discovery and discovery and discovery, and a lot of grumbling, because everyone always grumbles about discovery in civil litigation. That's my experience.
So when you say that this is pertinent, you mean you believed that the storage devices that you had gotten from your parents' apartment in Springmore had files or evidence that were pertinent or relevant to this litigation?
Well, in that they were clearly about redistricting, and they were clearly labeled North Carolina.
Excellent. After speaking to Ms. Pinsky about the devices, did she put you in touch then with the plaintiffs' lawyers in this case?
Yes, and I wanted to clarify, the conversation about these hard drives did not come up in the first of my conversations with Ms. Pinsky. That was a development later on when we were discussing how I was very frustrated about what was going on and with my mother, and I commented. That's right. I commented on the progress that Common Cause had made with their assertions about the relative fairness of partisan redistricting, and also the underlying issues that sometimes are disguised, in my opinion, as simply partisan. And I sort of made that comment. I said, this is the furthest I've ever seen a plaintiff get with anything that my father drew. And I will say, I also said, and the way I knew my father a decade ago, he would have looked at those maps and laughed.
So am I understanding correctly that when you originally contacted Bob Phillips at Common Cause, and then in your initial discussions with Jane Pinsky, you were not contacting them principally about these storage devices?
No, I was not.
Okay. Did you say you were contacting them in hopes that Common Cause would be able to help refer you to a lawyer in connection with your mother's situation?
Yes.
Objection to form mischaracterizes the witness's testimony.
I know enough about litigation and attorneys because I'm a Hofeller. I knew that bias would come into play whether or not it was admitted. My father was often concerned that he would be discriminated against for his political position, and took care to know the allegiance of someone he chose to represent him. I was not familiar with this town. I did not know. I knew that many of the parties that were involved in the litigation surrounding my mother, I knew they had significant allegiances here, and I felt that the only party in Raleigh that would both believe me that politics was an element and would know who might be actually independent counsel for my mother.
Okay. And am I right that the lawyer you were seeking for your mother was in connection with the incompetency proceeding?
Correct.
Okay. Let's go back. After you discussed the storage devices with Ms. Pinsky at Common Cause, am I right that Ms. Pinsky then connected you directly with the plaintiffs' lawyers in this case?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that Mr. Spies and Ms. Mackey?
Yes.
Okay, great. And did you have conversations with them then?
Yes.
Okay. And in the course of those conversations, did you express that you wanted to provide the storage devices that you had gotten from the apartment in Springmore to them?
Yes.
Okay. Then in February of 2019, did you receive the subpoena from plaintiffs, and that's when you sent the storage devices?
Yes.
Okay. Did you tell anyone that you object to the subpoena, or that you object to providing a response to the subpoena?
No.
Okay. Did you, in fact, have any objection or problem with the subpoena or with providing a response to the subpoena?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did anyone else tell you that they object to the subpoena?
No.
Did anyone else tell you that they had any objection or problem with you just providing a response to the subpoena?
No.
Did you ever speak to your mother about the subpoena?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you tell her that you were going to respond to the subpoena?
Yes, and because there were files that belonged to her, I asked for her permission also. She said that she had no problem with that. She also felt, as I did, that the process would most likely be centered around provably pertinent files anyway. But that I reassured her, I assured her, I should say, that she should be aware that once you, and again, this is something my father taught me, once you let go of it, you don't have control of it anymore. So you can't be guaranteed what will and won't be disclosed. So it's something you should be prepared for when you are involved with the discovery.
Okay. And in the course of that discussion with your mother, did you understand that your mother was giving you permission or her okay to?
Yes.
Let me finish the question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm just going to ask it again. Okay. So in the course of that discussion with your mother about the subpoena, did you understand that she was giving you her permission or her okay to provide the storage devices that we've discussed to the plaintiff's lawyers in response to the subpoena?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just have a few other questions. And I did want to ask you just a couple of questions about your relationship with each of your parents, and I don't intend to pry, but I'll just ask a couple of basic questions, if that's okay.
That is okay, yes.
Okay. Would you say that you had a positive relationship with your father in recent years?
Not in recent years, no.
Okay. When was the last time you spoke to your father before his death last year?
July of 2014.
Okay. Would you say that you have a positive relationship, a functional relationship with your mother?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether an official estate was opened for your father after his death?
No. That has been a confused issue.
Okay. So when you say no, the answer is no, you don't know.
Exactly.
Okay, that's fine. Did you send these storage devices to the plaintiff's lawyers in this case to get back at your father or to spite your father for personal reasons?
Not at all.
Okay. Could you just tell me briefly in your words, why did you want to provide these devices to the plaintiff's lawyers in this case?
when I was expressing my skepticism that there would be anything in the way of evidence, I stated that I felt that these files would certainly be of historical value, that they would give insight into the process, not any value judgment on that process. I did not have, my political viewpoint to me seemed irrelevant to the function of census data turning into voting districts. And I really thought of it in those terms. I knew that if I presented them this way, that they would be preserved, that their integrity would be preserved, and everything there, including my files, including other matters completely unrelated to this, that would be a snapshot in time.
Was there any financial benefit to you personally from providing these files to the plaintiffs as lawyers? Did you make any profit here?
No.
Okay. Can we go off the record, take a 5-minute break?
Great.
Going off the record, the time is 10:24 a.m. Going back on the record, the time is 10:46 a.m.
Thank you, Ms. Hofeller. I have no more questions for you today. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Ms. Hofeller, Elizabeth Scully, we met earlier this morning. I represent the legislative defendants in this case, and I do have some follow-up questions that I would like to ask of you today. First, if I could turn your attention to the document that was marked as Exhibit 2 that you went through with counsel for the plaintiffs earlier. Looking at the first page, where there's a photograph of a box and then appears to be handwriting addressed to Arnold Porter. Do you see that there?
I see the handwriting behind the box, yes.
Is that your handwriting?
No.
No. Do you know whose handwriting that is?
No.
Did you personally prepare the box, label it, put the contents in the box, and send it to Arnold Porter?
I put the contents in the box. I sealed the box, and at the FedEx office, the label was printed out and put on it in front of me.
Did you send the materials directly to Arnold Porter or to a vendor before you sent them to Arnold Porter?
I sent them directly to Arnold Porter.
Did you ever send the materials to a vendor?
No.
Turning to it's marked number 4 in Exhibit number 2.
Okay.
You have that in front of you.
I do.
And it appears on page number 4 of Exhibit number 2 is a picture of a thumb drive. Do you see that?
I do.
And on that thumb drive, there's some drawing, handwritten drawing on that thumb drive. Do you recall what material was contained in this thumb drive?
Are you, please clarify the handwriting being the A as opposed to the label on the drive, which is etched into the metal.
Well, let me back up and ask you this. Do you know on this document on the 4th page, there appears to be 2 photographs. Both appear to reflect a thumb drive. Do you know if these are 2 different thumb drives or 1 thumb drive?
I believe that is the 2 opposite sides of the same thumb drive.
Do you know that for a fact, or is that just you're making an assumption?
I am making an assumption.
Do you know if you ever reviewed the information that was on this thumb drive that appears on page 4 of Exhibit number 2 that you sent to Arnold Porter?
I know that I reviewed all of the drives that I sent to Arnold Porter. I do not recall what was on which storage device.
Did you review all of the drives that you sent to Arnold Porter during the same day?
Yes. Yes. Maybe perhaps I had to take a break overnight, but it was, I made sure that I was not including anything that was mine that wasn't, related to this at all, that I hadn't mistakenly mixed anything in, that these were all just the files and things that had come from my father's apartment. So that's about the extent of it.
So if I understand you, if you found materials on the in any of these thumb drives or drives that you thought were yours or your personal information, you removed that information before you sent it to Arnold Porter?
No.
Objection that mischaracterizes the testimony.
I believe...
She asked the question, so she can answer it.
Tom, how many people are representing your side in this deposition?
3.
I believe you testified earlier that when you looked through the materials you took from your father's room, that you did find information on those electronic files that were personal to you, correct?
That is correct.
Did you produce that personal information when you sent the electronic materials to Arnold Porter?
Yes, I did.
A moment ago, when you said you looked through the electronic files before you produced them to Arnold Porter to make sure that nothing that related only to you or that wasn't relevant, you wanted to make sure that wasn't being produced. What did you mean by that?
That wasn't what I said. What I said is I checked them to make sure that they were my father's, that I hadn't mistakenly grabbed something from my own room, a storage device that I would use with my phone, with my laptop, completely unrelated to this, never having been touched by my father. That's what I meant.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. How many hours did it take you to go through and review the entire contents of the materials that you provided to Arnold Porter?
And please, I would like to clarify that I did not open every file. I merely observed that this was the media that I thought it was when I arrived at my home. So it was, 2-3 hours, I think, making sure some of them, they didn't light up at first. I had to put them in the other USB drive, reseat the connectors. Some of them were slower than others to open, but I would say that I had made sure that I'd just done that last check before putting it in the mail, that I knew what I was sending and that it was all what I was asserting it was. And I think that process took, maybe about 2 or 3 hours.
Do you know how many files you opened during those 2 to 3 hours?
During those 2 to 3 hours, I didn't open any of the files. I merely looked in the basic root folders on each to confirm what it was, and that it had belonged to my father really was the point. The files on all of these that were mine specifically, as in photographs I took, letters I wrote, those I had looked at early on. My interest in these drives initially was only for those. I ignored everything else for a period of time.
When you took these files from your father's room and spoke to your mother about it, in that conversation with your mother, you told her you were taking the files because you wanted to look through the files to find personal things related to you, photographs that may be on the files, correct?
That's correct.
And with that understanding, your mother gave you permission to take the files, correct?
I did not feel that my mother's permission for me to have these was conditional on anything. When she gave me permission to take them, it was maybe I mentioned that I was excited about the possibility that there would be pictures of my children. But she said, they're yours. Take them. I don't have any use for them.
And when you had that initial conversation with your mother, you had no discussions with her and expressed no interest in looking through to find any of your father's business records or materials he may have created in connection with his work as an expert in other litigations, correct?
Correct. As a matter of fact, I went to the point of making sure that I asked my mother that all of his specifically work-related material had already been collected. I didn't wish to assert myself into the business intentionally.
At some point, you say when you first took the files, you didn't know what was on these files when you first took them, correct?
Some of them I didn't. The backups that I recognized from my parents' home PC back in Alexandria, I was at least vaguely familiar with what had been on my parents' home PC when I was there. So those were pretty much as I expected them. And then my thought was that I would at least look at everything and see what it was.
Now, you said you went to your mother's home. It was sometime in October 2018. Do you know specifically when you went to your mother's home and took these files?
October 11th.
And how do you know it was October 11th?
I have had to recount the details of my arrival at my mother's house several times over the past few months, so it's become pretty normal.
Do you have any documents that reflect when you were in North Carolina?
Documents? I don't think so, no.
Did you go to any restaurants, make any credit card charges, purchase gasoline near your mother's apartment? Any type of document that would indicate the time period when you were visiting with your mother?
I believe that receipts would reflect that I was in Raleigh during certain days.
How long did you stay? Did you stay with your mother at that time?
Not at that time. At that time, I stayed in a hotel, and I stayed for, I believe, around 4 days. I don't honestly recall off the top of my head if it was 3 nights or 4 nights.
Was the hotel located in Raleigh?
Yes.
What was the name of the hotel where you stayed?
I stayed 1 night in a hotel, the name of which I don't recall because I didn't like it. So then I moved to the La Quinta, I believe, yes,
And
near Crabtree.
How did you pay for your stay at the La Quinta?
I paid, I think the first night I paid cash, and then the next night I paid with my debit card.
And you get monthly statements of your debit card?
I think I've gone paperless.
Okay. Do you receive emails of notification of your debit card statement when it's available?
Yes.
And your debit card is held with what bank?
PNC.
After you took the materials from your father's room, when did you first begin to look through the materials?
That same evening.
When you stayed at the hotel that you don't recall the name of?
Yes.
And how many, did you review one device? How many devices did you review that night?
That first night, I stuck with the one because that's where I found hundreds of pictures of me with my infant children.
And was the one a thumb drive or was it a hard drive, if you remember?
An external hard drive.
When looking through this one external hard drive on that first night, did you also find materials that appeared to be related to your father's business work with his partner, Dale Oldham?
I noticed, as was standard on my father's home PC, there was usually at least a folder related to his work. I was accustomed to not really paying much attention to the specifics. I talked to him about things. I didn't need to poke.
And when you noticed that there were folders on this hard drive that you reviewed related to your father's work, and knowing that Dale Oldham had taken efforts to try to reclaim business records, did you go back and tell your mom, you know, we still have information related to Dad's work?
My father always had information related to his work on the personal hard drive. It wasn't noteworthy.
Does that mean you did not go back and tell your mom that there was information related to his work on the hard drive that you had?
At some point when I discussed the fact that they might be of interest to the case, again, with my mother, there are some things, because she's my mother, that don't need to be explicitly stated. She assumed that there would be at least some work-related material on the hard drive. I discussed with her the nature of this litigation, and again, such similar litigation was a regular fixture in my entire life living with my father. So the idea that there would be some litigation going on around things that he had drawn was just par for the course. So yes, I don't know that I would have explicitly said, Mother, there are these kinds of files on this. It was more like, Common Cause may have an interest in these work files. And even with her, I even discussed my belief that this would not, that these all being backups, that this would not be any information that was not already known and had already been disclosed. There were files that were titled Discovery, so I assumed that those had gone previously into discoveries that had already happened.
From your answer, I'm still not clear whether you actually had a conversation with your mother about your father's business records that you discovered on the external hard drives. Did you have a specific conversation with your mother to tell her that you identified business records of your father's on these external hard drives that you had taken possession of?
Objection asked and answered.
All of those points were at some point mentioned. My mother was aware of the fact that the interest, the subpoena for these hard drives was in fact for work-related files only. So not only was it clear to her that there were work-related files, but it was clear to her that the lawyers that would be looking at it on either side would not be looking at anything other than my father's work-related files.
When did you first begin discussing with your mother the fact that Common Cause may have an interest in your father's work files?
She and I were discussing the matter of this pressing issue of hers. Most of our discussions about Common Cause in those first 2 months were just about how nice it was that they had given us some referrals.
When you say your discussions in those first 2 months, you mean What time period do you mean?
That would have been October and November.
Of 2018.
Correct, I'm sorry, yes.
So October, November 2018, your discussions with your mother are focusing on the attorney referral you received for her, and on the...
And her case.
And her
really.
case.
All of it, as it may be related to the unfortunate politicizing of our family life.
And when you say her case, I believe you testified earlier that the case you're referring to was a petition to have your mother found incompetent, correct?
Yes.
You are aware that there was an interim order entered and your mother had a guardian over her estate and over her person appointed, correct?
I am aware.
Okay. Do you know the time period in which that occurred?
November, early November.
October, November, your conversations with your mom with respect to Common Cause are focused on how they'd helped her identify an attorney. Who was that attorney that they helped her identify?
I was referred to Alan Fromm, who explained that he didn't handle specifically those matters, and referred us to Douglas Noreen.
At what point in time did you discuss with your mother the possibility of turning over your father's business records to Common Cause or to Arnold Porter?
The subpoena, that would be when we specifically discussed that. I think I might have quipped about that David Daly article, though, way back in October when I was looking at those hard drives, recalling that comment somewhere out there on a hard drive. And I made a joke about that. I wasn't really, it's like, look at those hard drives. Well, Dale got all the good stuff. Sorry?
Did you have a conversation with your mother about the possibility of turning over your father's business records to Common Cause or Arnold Porter before you received the subpoena?
I think that she was also curious about the case, and I had said that I think I shared with her on that moment when I realized, maybe around that same day when I realized that this wasn't strictly appeal, that there had been a new matter opened. And she never really was all that familiar with the details. And to be honest, I'm no expert on redistricting either. I really only felt that I was uniquely informed about my father as a person and perhaps his process, his creative process, his political philosophy, those kinds of things. I felt that I was perhaps, that I possessed some unique understanding of the man. But my mother has a career of her own. So her interest was really more incidental. And just as much as anyone in the public, the general public might be interested in the political process.
You testified earlier that you understood your father had a business and a business partner, Dale Oldham, correct?
Correct.
And you understood that your father and Mr. Oldham in their business were retained and engaged as experts in litigations over the years, correct?
That's correct.
You testified you're familiar with civil litigation earlier, correct?
Yeah, and specifically with litigation on the matters that concern the people.
You understand that in connection with your father's work as an expert consultant, that there are materials that he prepares as an expert that are privileged materials, materials that he prepares on behalf of the clients he's been retained to be an expert for, correct?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion. The witness is not a lawyer.
None of the materials were labeled privileged.
Do you believe that you have the appropriate training or skills to determine whether the materials on your father's hard drives contain privileged information?
All of the attorneys I've ever worked with, if they were concerned about protecting privilege, had pretty bold letters that said, the following contains privileged attorney-client communication, and the preceding contains privileged attorney-client communication. In that, I can read when something says that it's privileged, I'm qualified. But no, beyond that, I think if I just stumbled into a client's file, I would not be able to say which was and wasn't privileged, no.
You do not have a law degree, correct?
That is absolutely
You
correct.
have no legal training, correct?
No formal training.
You've never
Just on the
worked.
street.
You've never been employed or worked in a law firm, correct?
I believe that I've done temp work as a receptionist for law firms, but nothing noteworthy in that it would pad my CV.
You have never made any determinations or been asked by anyone to make any determinations about whether something is a privileged document or not, correct?
No, that's correct. I mean, I have not been ever asked by anyone to do that, no.
Other than seeing a document marked as privileged, you've testified you don't know and you don't have the skills to determine whether a document is a privileged document or not, if it doesn't reflect privilege on the document itself.
Well, you know, if it were civil litigation concerning personal matters, then I think I would assume privilege. But considering that this is a public matter, and this is my understanding of political philosophy and the founding of this republic, is that this concerns the people, and therefore I would probably err in the direction of it not being privileged if it weren't marked. So, if that clarifies.
Prior to making the production of the electronic files that you made to Arnold Porter in response to the subpoena marked as Exhibit 1, did you engage in any sort of review to determine whether the files that you were turning over contained privileged information?
I'll object. It's ambiguous. The term privilege, there are lots of privilege.
Also, I really was, it had already been kind of clarified that the best way to preserve the integrity of this data would be not to pick and choose. There were personal files of mine on these hard drives, and I left everything exactly as it was. I did not make decisions about what did and didn't go, specifically for the purpose of a historical documentation of the complete media as it was when I found it.
You testified that it was clarified to you that the best way to preserve this data was not to go through and make any selection or remove anything from it, just to turn all of the materials over to Arnold Porter, correct?
Objection. I think that mischaracterizes the testimony.
You can answer the question.
Could you ask it again?
You testified that it was clarified to you that the best way for you to preserve the integrity of this data was to just turn over the data in its entirety to Arnold Porter and not to go through and pick and choose or remove anything from the data, correct?
I'll object.
These are theoretical.
Hold on.
Sorry.
I have to state my objection. So I'll object because it mischaracterizes the testimony and the use of the passive voice makes it ambiguous.
Now you can answer.
I don't think there are any. I don't think there are any solid lines in this. I think that there was a collective attempt to maintain accuracy, maintain transparency.
Who clarified that for you when you said it was clarified for me? Who was that?
Okay.
Hold on a second. Please let her finish.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Is the question done? Okay, I'll object because it mischaracterizes the testimony. She has not testified that anyone clarified anything for her.
Yeah, that's.
You may answer the question.
Yes, I was going to say exactly that. I don't recall that it was, certainly if I said clarify, in the discussion that I had with the attorneys, Carolyn Mackey and Eddie Spees, there was discussion on how it would be best recognized in court as a good chain of custody, transparency. There would be no accusation of picking and choosing, of keeping some things secret and some things not, if the media were turned over to a third party in its exact state.
Prior to turning over the hard drives and the thumb drives to Arnold Porter, did you ask your counsel to conduct, well, let me ask this, did you have representation at that point in time?
I did not, or were you retained yet? I don't, certainly not in this matter. No, I did not have counsel at that time, I don't think, or did I? I don't know. I wasn't consulting with an attorney on this matter.
I take it from, no, that's all right. I take it from your answer that you did not seek counsel from any attorney about whether there were concerns with respect to any privileged information that may be turned over to Arnold Porter in response to the subpoena.
I'll object. I think the question is asking about communication she may or may not have had between herself and one of her lawyers, which would be privileged.
You testified a moment ago you didn't have a counsel at that point in time. I'm just clarifying that you never sought any guidance from any attorney as to whether there was a concern about turning over privileged information from your father's business records to Arnold Porter.
And I will object to that because if she did it,
it would be
attorney-client privileged.
Instruct her not. You should instruct her not to answer.
And don't answer, please.
I'll ask a more general question. Did you seek any counsel prior to producing the materials in response to Arnold Porter's subpoena?
Same objection. Please don't answer.
Whether she talked to an attorney is privileged? Are you saying
I think so.
I'm sorry.
Whether she talked to an attorney is privileged? Just the fact that she talked to an attorney?
Just the general thing, not what specifically was discussed. Did she speak with an attorney?
I'm allowed the same objection, yes. And give the same instruction.
You testified earlier that you understood that your father's business partner, Mr. Oldham, had taken steps to retrieve records related to their business, correct? They retrieved one of your father's computers. Yes? Two.
His computers.
When you realized that there was information related to your father's business contained on these hard drives and thumb drives, did you reach out to Mr. Oldham to let him know that you had possession of business records of theirs?
There have been work files on my father's home PC since we had a home PC. So no, in that I asked, there are other matters concerning contact. Dale isn't exactly easy to get a hold of, but I felt that I had pretty much covered that when I asked everyone involved that knew anything about my father and or Dale if Dale had gotten everything he wanted, and the answer was yes. Given the fact that some of those backups are from 2009, 10, 11, and that I was in many of those times living at home, using that computer as my own, and those files were there.
You said you asked everyone involved if Dale got everything he wanted, and the answer was yes. Who is the everyone involved that you asked?
The other person that I asked there are two other people that I asked, other than my mother. I asked my uncle, and through, I asked my cousin, and I sort of tried to establish that he had come and gone. And that was when my mother explained that also when Dale left with the things that were related to geographic strategies before my father died, that my father had given him his half of the business, which amounted to around $300,000.
Who was your uncle that you asked? What's his name?
Chris Hartsoff.
What was his relationship with Dale?
He did not have a relationship with Dale. Rather, he had been present during my parents' move from their house in Raleigh to the retirement community in Raleigh. I was interested in this move because many of my personal possessions went missing at this time. Was my principal interest in finding out what had happened.
And who's your cousin that you spoke with?
Trudy Harris.
Did she have a relationship with Dale?
No, none of these people had a relationship with Dale. It's just that he had apparently been there during this longer period of time when my family was helping my parents move. That's all.
If you wanted to know if Dale Oldham had gotten everything that he wanted, why not ask Mr. Oldham directly himself?
Because he was a part of the litigation that was ongoing with my mother. He was an opposing party in that litigation and non-communicative before that point as well. I did, at one point, attempt to reach out to him to discuss my mother, but he did not return my calls and resisted all of my attempts to talk to him.
When did you attempt to reach out to Mr. Oldham to discuss your mother?
Twice, once during the first trip to Raleigh and again in the second trip to Raleigh. Oh, and then we sent him notice of certain documents, family documents that bore his name, as those documents had been changed. He got notice of that as well.
The first trip to Raleigh, was that the trip in October, on or about October 11th, 2018?
Yes.
And when was the second trip?
That would have been shortly after. Let's see, the first trip was October. Okay, so I believe that I was then 3 or 4 days back in Kentucky, but the situation was serious enough that I felt I had to change my plans to continue my work in Kentucky and actually drop everything in Kentucky and come back to Raleigh to help my mother. That would be, I would think I was back by the 18th.
Prior to turning over the hard drives and the thumb drives to Arnold Porter, is it correct that you never communicated with Dale Oldham to let him know that materials related to his business with your father were being turned over?
Those were my father's files. I did not assume that any of them or all of them, many of them were there on that hard drive before geographic strategies existed. There were files related to my father's work that were there from a time when I'm not even sure that Dale knew my father. I did not really think of this in terms of Dale Oldham, no. I thought of this in terms of my dead father and his work in public service, not so much about Dale, honestly.
Is that no, you did not communicate with Dale Oldham before you turned over these files to Arnold Porter to let him know that there were records related to his business with your father that were being turned over in response to a subpoena?
Objection asked and answered.
Go ahead and answer.
I didn't attempt yet again to contact Mr. Oldham in advance of responding to that subpoena. No, I did not.
Did you ever attempt to contact Mr. Oldham and leave any substantive message for him that you had possession of
My
business
father's stuff.
records,
Sorry.
of records related to your father or Mr. Oldham's business, and that you intended to turn those records over to Arnold & Porter and Common Cause?
Objection asked and answered.
I didn't.
Turning back to exhibit number 2, I believe you testified that you, sitting here today, you do not know what specific information is contained on the thumb drive that is pictured on page 4 of exhibit 2, correct?
That's correct.
If I could turn your attention to page 7. And do you know what this device is that appears on page 7?
That appears to be an external drive.
Do you know what the contents were of this external drive that appears on page 7?
I know that that's my father's handwriting on that label. Beyond that, I don't know offhand.
Do you have any specific recollection of reviewing the files that are contained on the hard drive that appears on page 7 of exhibit 2?
Not specifically that one, no. None of them specifically. They all seem to have sort of a mixture of different kinds of data on different matters. All of them were mingled.
Turning to page 9, do you know what that is a picture of?
Once again, it appears to be a picture of one of the external drives.
I take it similar to the drive that we saw in the picture immediately before, that you have no specific recollection of what material is contained on this drive, correct?
That's correct.
Is it fair to say that you do not have any specific recollection of what information is contained on any of the hard drives or the thumb drives that are photographed that appear in Exhibit 2?
Well, it's very similar with all of them, was my impression. So it would be very difficult to say what was on which. I mean, I don't know offhand. Like there were two, for example, there were two drives that were identical in appearance, but they seemed to be backups of the same hard drive, but at different times. So that would be very hard for me to say which was the 2011 set and which was the 2013 set, for example.
You testified earlier when under your examination with Plaintiffs' Counsel that you recognized one of the hard drives because of the blue rubber band that was around it.
No, the blue cover.
Blue cover. Turning your attention to page 15 of Exhibit 2. Is that a picture of the blue cover you were referring to when you testified earlier?
I would assume that it is the cover that I was referring to.
And what was it about that cover that stood out in your mind?
You know, it wasn't an effort at precision. I just remembered that this was a cover that went typically with a brand and type of external storage device that my father liked to use. And I had a hunch, I was hoping that it would be what it turned out to be, and that is a backup of my parents' personal computer, which would contain the files that I was looking for of mine.
In the subpoena that you received from Arnold Porter, there was a specific request looking for materials relating to the 2011 or the 2017 North Carolina redistricting. You understood that, correct?
Yes, yes.
Did you undertake any efforts to limit the materials that you were turning over to Arnold Porter in response to the subpoena to only documents that related to the 2011 or 2017 North Carolina redistricting?
I'll object. I think it mischaracterizes the scope of the face of the subpoena.
Go ahead and answer.
The request was for any and all materials that might. So since there appeared to be relevant data, I think I already answered this question. I think the idea was that it was going to be preserved and that I would not be deciding which files would go and which files wouldn't.
I take it from your answer that you did not review each hard drive and each thumb drive to confirm that each hard drive and each thumb drive in fact had any information with respect to the 2011 or 2017 North Carolina redistricting. Instead, you just turned it over in its entirety.
I was answering a subpoena. Sorry.
To Arnold Porter, correct?
Yes, yes.
You testified earlier when you took the electronic hard drives and thumb drives from your father's home. You said you were so thrilled to have precious data of yours. You said mine, but what precious data were you referring to?
Pictures of me and my infant children, pictures of me on my property in West Virginia, pictures of dead friends. Music recorded years ago by me and a friend who had a band together. Letters that I had written to friends. Letters that I wrote to my father. Documents that I might have otherwise possession of if it weren't for, first, a house fire that destroyed everything I owned in 2013, and also a divorce in which everything else that I had pretty much was, left in the hands of someone I didn't really feel like communicating with.
You didn't consider the records relating to your father's work, redistricting work, to be your data, correct?
The hard drives were given to me by my mother. So I would say that I considered everything on those hard drives that my father had left in his room, that my mother gave to me unconditionally. I considered all of it mine at that point when it was given to me by my deceased father's wife.
Even if the material related to your father's business with another business partner, you considered it your material, your...
I considered the story...
Objection. It's been asked and answered.
Go ahead and answer.
I considered everything that my mother gave me that had previously belonged to my father, who was now dead, mine, yes.
Did your father have a will?
Yes.
Do you know if in the will there was any provision with respect to his personal property and who the personal property would be left to.
My understanding, not being an estate attorney, is my mother was the beneficiary.
Have you seen a copy of the will?
Yes.
Did your father make any direct gifts to you in the will?
I don't believe he did, no.
Did your father in the will address anything related to his business records or business files?
I don't recall.
Prior to turning over the electronic files to Arnold and Porter, you said you spent 2 to 3 hours immediately before turning them over to Arnold and Porter. I would like to understand how much time in total you spent reviewing the materials at any point in time before you gave them to Arnold and Porter.
That would be difficult. Do you mean, for example, I printed out copies of pictures of me and my children. Do you consider me putting those on my wall, time reviewing the materials?
No. Time spent looking through the electronic files on a computer.
That would be very difficult to determine. I mean, I don't know, how much time do you spend looking at pictures of your children?
Putting aside the amount, well,
I didn't spend a lot of time looking at my father's work files, if that's what you're driving at. No,
so
I
let's
didn't.
focus on that point. Putting aside the time you spent looking through files that related to you, or photographs related to you, or issues that were personal to you, putting all of those personal materials aside, how much time would you estimate you spent reviewing files that related to your father, his redistricting work, his business records, any expert documents he may have created, those materials?
Well, it's also hard because there were certain situations in some of those backups where there were folders that contained a multitude of mixed documents. In certain cases, I would open something thinking that it was one thing and find that it was something different. So there were both situations where, for example, news articles that he had in a folder. I believe there were a lot of news articles that I actually read through that he had saved. Maybe articles even that mentioned him specifically, and of course I was interested in preserving that. Of course I wanted, a scrapbook of my father. And so also there were, just looking at the file extensions and having a basic familiarity with my father's work, I knew a lot of them would be file extensions that I wouldn't even be able to open, considering that I didn't have the right proprietary software. So, wow, it would be very difficult for me to give an estimate. I don't really understand, maybe, I mean, not to be snide, but what exactly are we driving at? How many hours I spent looking specifically at just the files in folders that contain things like, again, letters to me, old trust documents, letters that my grandfather sent to my father, and interesting stories, and maybe a few photographs, some of them of my father and my relatives, some of them of my father and my children, some of them me and my children. It would be very difficult to give you an estimate of how many of those minutes were spent looking at files that were specifically related to his work, much less specifically related to which. I mean, I wouldn't be able to distinguish the legislative maps from the congressional district maps.
Is it fair to say that the majority of the time you spent reviewing the files was spent reviewing materials related personal to you, and that in comparison you spent very little time reviewing files
Very
related
little
to your
is kind of
father's
a
work?
yeah, sorry.
It's my question. Is it fair to say that?
Objection asked and answered. We've been going about an hour.
We can take a break.
We'll take a break.
Going off the record, the time is 11:39 a.m.